Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. In the last part, we got swallowed by a giant fish, and now we're inside its belly because it's the next dungeon. I'd say this is one of the weirder third dungeons. And it is, but it's at least one we're used to at this point, because we've done inside the creature dungeons so often in games at this point that we're used to it, especially a certain level in Devil May Cry 3. Now, despite what it looks like, you can actually leave this dungeon. If you go towards the teeth here in the mouth, you do leave, and when you go back outside, Jabu-Jabu's mouth is hanging open for you to enter again. So you never are trapped in here, and you never have to get a fish again to access it again. With that said, there's no reason to leave at this point. And welcome to the main room! You! Who are you? I am Ruto, Princess of the Zoras. What? Are you saying my father asked me you to come here to save me? I'd never ask anyone to do such a thing. Letter in a bottle? I have no idea what you're talking about. My father's worried about me? I don't care. Anyway, I can't go home right now. And you, get out of here, understand? Oh no! Well, excuse me, princess. How have I held back on that to this point? Are you still hanging around here? I told you to go away. I'm okay. I've been going inside Lord Jabu-Jabu's belly since I was a little, but Lord Jabu-Jabu is very strange today. There are electrified jellyfish and strange holes around. On top of that, my precious stone was... but that's none of your business. Anyway... You, go home now, understand? No. You're that worried about me? Then I'll give you the honor of carrying me. However, I won't leave until I find the thing I'm looking for. You'd better believe me. So welcome to the main mechanic of this dungeon. We need to carry around Princess Ruto and use her as a puzzle-solving device. There are switches we're going to need to place her down on. We just need to constantly keep her around. Though in the case you leave her in a room more often than not, you'll find her right back where we just saw her. So back in that main room. Though I forget if it's on the top floor where the actual holes are, or if it's in that previous room. With that said, you can also use her to kill certain enemies. Namely, the bubbles floating around. You can throw her into them, and she doesn't have a health bar, so she can't take damage at all. Now, Jabu-Jabu's belly is the water dungeon for this point in the game, but only in passing because there's actually not much water for you to walk through. There's some other interesting mechanics, I guess, later on, but for the most part, this place is just themed after water. I guess gastrointestinal is the better gimmick for it, huh? Now, there are some pretty annoying enemies in here. The bubbles are annoying because you can't see them out with your slingshot, so you have to either slash them, throw Ruto into them, or use the dungeons item on them. And we also have the introduction to these little stingray enemies I can't remember the name of in this room, who are invincible to damage until you bait them out of the floor. And at that point, there's a couple things you can do to kill them. Either you can swing your sword at them, you can use the slingshot, but what I really recommend you do is use Deku Nuts, as it stuns them and makes them fall back down to the ground, yes. But it also prevents them from moving around for a bit, so you can get a jump slash in and potentially kill them that much more quickly. It's strange, Deku Nuts are a useful item, but only in very noticeable spurts. You can go entire dungeons without them being absolutely necessary in any regard, or even too useful in any regard. But then there's like one dungeon where they're a key to survival, almost it feels like. As a kid, admittedly, this dungeon did stump me, but that's just because compared to the other previous two dungeons, it has a bit more back and forth. But even then, that's only in around the middle section of the dungeon, and it's very simple back and forth. It's more so just paying attention to what's around you. And I was not good at environmental awareness as a child. Now, in this room, there's an elevator that's going to take us back up to the main room, with where all the holes were. But you might notice there's actually a hole right there in the water. If you swim under that, you'll find yourselves at a Deku or business scrub that'll sell you something. I forget what it is. I want to say it's probably Deku Nuts or Deku Seeds, but I can't recall which one of the two it is. I am leaning towards it being Deku Nuts, though. Now, in the next room where we first met Ruto, there are several holes you can fall down into, and they do lead to various portions of that one room we met her in, but most of them are worthless. Aside from the one right that's just to our left that we fell into the first time, there's only one other hole that actually leads to a place we need for progression, and we can't even access it yet because there's a giant green tentacle blocking it. Welcome to this room. I'm actually not sure how you're supposed to kill these enemies, and a very weird thing, you might notice that the textures on the walls are warping and flowing in a certain direction. If you stand on any of those floors that have that same texture that's warping in that direction, you do actively get moved like it's a conveyor belt, which is weird. Also, that switch is one of the few in the game that actually requires more weight than we have. You need to carry Ruto to do anything and access this room. Now, this portion of the dungeon, I guess it's supposed to be Jabu-Jabu's intestines, if anything, is the back and forth section I was talking about. There is one room you need to order. You always need to go from one room to another room across the way, to another room across the way again, to another room across the way again, before finding yourselves in the central room of the area. With that said, most of the main items of this dungeon are also in this area, which, might I add, is, despite what the timer says, already about maybe halfway through the dungeon. Jabu-Jabu's belly is not a very long dungeon, it's just that there are a surprising amount of cutscenes for a dungeon at this point in the game in it, when we get towards the mid-boss. With that, though, time for the super important item here. As you may have noticed, there's a lot of enemies up in the air in this dungeon, so we're getting a boomerang. On the select item subscreen, you can set it to the C buttons. Press C to use it to attack distant enemies. Alright, it's a bit deceitful about what the boomerang does there. You do use it like the slingshot where you go into an aiming mode and then you throw it at a place and it goes over there. And like most boomerangs do, it comes back to you. However, you can use it to stun enemies, it'll kill certain enemies outright. And it also can retrieve items from a distance. Namely, Skulltula tokens is what you're going to be retrieving with it the most, though. Yeah, this is me showing off. Yeah, you do move on this texture for some reason. It's weird, but okay. And now we have a pressure-sensitive switch. This is the one point in the dungeon where if you leave Ruto behind, she'll still be in the same place as she was before. Oddly specific, but I understand why. And here we have one of the, I guess, several mini-bosses of the dungeon. Tentacles. We need to throw our boomerang at them when they're trying to attack us, but they'll only be attacking you if you're right next to them. Throw your boomerang at the weak spot in the middle. I think the third or fourth time, it'll do that. I want to say those are supposed to be further appendages of the boss fight at the end of the dungeon, but honestly, I don't know because I don't want to think about the interior of a creature for longer than 3 seconds at a time. And here's the dungeon map. A bit late to get this. Again, I forget if I show it off this time or not, but we are a good amount of the way through the dungeon. Alright, with that tentacle down, we can now head... How inconsiderate! How could you leave me behind? If you're a man, act like one. Take responsibility. I think she says that no matter how many times you leave her behind at any of the given junctures you can. The red slimy thing is gone. That must be because you cut the red tail. Will that work with the other ones too? Because there is, I believe, a purple one, a green one, and a blue one too. Now, out of every room here in the back portion of Jabu-Jabu, this is the only one that's optional, and we just have more of the bubbles to take out with the boomerang. This is just for the compass, so if you don't want this, you can just ignore this room. In fact, on my casual playthroughs, I very often do, as my experience with Zelda casually is quite different than it is at least on repeated playthroughs of a game, because like maybe I'll go for the dungeon item, and if it's required, the map. But compasses, unrequired chests like rupees. If it's not a key, I'm generally not going for it. Yeah, at least when it comes to the 3D games. With 2D Zelda games, I play a bit differently just because... I guess because it's 2D. And I often go for everything, and even then, part of that is because in Minish Cap in particular, you kind of want to go for every chest anyway because it's a kinstone piece. And you never know when you might need one of those, given a large amount of the completion percentage is tied to that. Alright, from here we want to head to the top right room, as that's where the next tail's awaiting us. This portion of the dungeon does get pretty samey pretty quickly, admittedly. But thankfully, it's the only dungeon that does something outright like this, I say, remembering that the 4th dungeon exists and it has a similar enough mechanic, I suppose. It's weird, despite getting often stuck in here as a kid, Jabu-Jabu is probably the least interesting dungeon in this game, and probably one of the most tedious, barring the obvious example that everyone talks about, that even I don't find that bad to begin with. And I can't tell if that's just because it's placed at the end of the first third of a game, so they were running out of, like, introductory ideas to do, and they wanted to get you introduced to more complex stuff without getting too complex with it, or if they were just running out of simple dungeon ideas, quote-unquote. Also, this was a dungeon I had a lot of problems in as a kid, not just, like, actually having trouble fighting around, but I couldn't believe that this fish was this big inside, because of the size of it on the overworld. I look back at young me and say, calm down, it's a video game, it doesn't need logic. Every world has its rules, yes, but who gives a shit? I will say, though, this dungeon definitely upgraded from the 3DS version's textures, as they made everything a lot gooier, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all. That is the last tail / tentacle dealt with, though, so if we come back into the stomach room, I guess that's what this is supposed to be. Actually, this might be, like, supposed to be the liver. I don't know. There was a tentacle over here, but we can now enter this hole here, which allows us to get to this side of this room, allowing us to continue on. Also, there's 2 gold skulls you can grab from this point, because I think they imply you to fall down one of the wrong holes at least once to get somewhere else, but you can just get them both here. Thankfully. I'd rather not have to fall down an extra pathway just to get a Skulltula, but then I remember there's pathways in later dungeons that just have rooms with Skulltulas again, and oh dear. That's it! That's what I've been looking for! Throw me up there! Onto the platform! Okay, okay, calm down. Princess Ruto got the spiritual stone, but why Princess Ruto? Oh my goodness, I finally found my mother's stone. I got very upset when Lord Jabu-Jabu swallowed it. While I was feeding him, he suddenly swallowed me. I was so surprised I dropped it inside. Now that I've found it, I don't need to be in here anymore. So, take me home right now. Sure thing. Oh, that's probably not good. Kya! What's this? An octopus? You're not Princess Ruto. Alright, mini-boss is Big Octo, and there are 2 strategies you can take to this. The long and stupid way of trying to run the opposite direction from it, in which case it might eventually either reverse its direction anyway, or you'll just take too much damage from trying to run around the spiked center of the room. Or you can take the correct approach and just try to approach it head-on. As Big Octo's weak point is on its back. It's that giant green light we might see if I zoom the camera a certain way. But the easiest way to access that is to hit him with the boomerang from the front, as when you hit it with the boomerang, it'll be stunned and then spin around in either reverse direction or continue in your direction, in which case you can hit it with the boomerang again until it turns around. And when it turns around, you can throw the boomerang again, and then attack his weak point with either a jump slash from your sword or a Deku Stick for massive damage. This fight gave me more trouble than I'd like to admit as a kid just because I couldn't comprehend throwing the boomerang more than once in a row. Because young Kyle was not a very intelligent person, if you haven't gathered that at this point. I don't know why my speech is turning into Zap Brannigan. I will say though, I am grateful to see Octorok boss fights, because I always like boss fights that are based off Octoroks, just given they're the de facto classic Zelda enemy. Thankfully, it doesn't have much HP either, as long as you use Deku Sticks. And now we can climb onto the platform and head further up. And at this point, we are really close to the end of the dungeon. As the first few dungeons in the game give you very straight shot pathways to the boss fights, whereas later dungeons, you'll have to worm your way around back and forth between areas and such. They do a good job at designing these dungeons to be intro dungeons, but I do feel at the same time that they're a bit too slow with the difficulty curve on these three, because the Deku Tree, Dodongo's Cavern, and Jabu-Jabu's Belly don't really increase in difficulty as much as they do map complexity, and even then, not by much. This is one of the weirder set pieces of the dungeon, as now we're back in the room before the belly, but we need to carry a box, one of these two, over to a pressure-sensitive switch. I don't know why they needed the pressure-sensitive switch, honestly, as there's no way to get over here beforehand. Alright, now this is the final main room in the dungeon. However, you're going to want to be careful before you leave here, as there is a gold Skulltula in here. And while backtracking in here isn't anything too bad, who wants to backtrack into Lord Jabu-Jabu's belly? Like, who? There is no one. Well, actually, I can think of a specific subset of people that would probably want to be in here. But I'd rather not joke about that, as that might require explaining that joke in the case people don't get it. It's a high-profile joke. Either everyone gets it and they laugh their ass off, or you have to explain why people think that way. And, no. Just no. No. Also, prepare to see me using the boomerang on basically every gold Skulltula moving forward, as it's one of the fastest ways to get Skulltula's tokens. Also, now for something the game only really has you do on, like, 2 occasions, and that's kind of surprising. We need to hit a switch with the boomerang by getting it around a certain other wall. I don't know why, the game just seldom does that. It does it here, and it does it in the final main dungeon before the actual final dungeon. I'm kind of surprised they don't do that more, as that's like the de facto thing a boomerang can do that not many other items can. Alright, boss fight of Jabu-Jabu's belly is Barinade, who has a giant armor of jellyfish on him to start. But what we want to do is actually separate him from Jabu-Jabu's membranes, whatever this is supposed to be. Just use your boomerangs on the 4 tentacles around, or is it 3, and he will just be let loose, in which case he lets loose his jellyfish. He's going to do this twice, once with the top layer, the second time with the bottom layer, and the best way to get rid of them is to boomerang him and then use Din's Fire, as it'll instantly kill any jellyfish within its range. You are technically supposed to use the boomerang to take out these jellyfish, as I'm doing now, but if you have Din's Fire because you went out of the way to get it now instead of later, it's worth using here. Barinade's main attacks are spinning around his jellyfish, or firing those weird satellite dishes it has on the top of its head, I guess that's a head, at you, for laser beams. None of them are that hard to dodge, honestly. It's weird. It's the most complex fight out of the first 3 boss fights in the game. But in execution, it's probably the easiest because you're that much more used to the controls at this point, and you can stun lock it using the boomerang, more or less. As at this phase, as soon as you hit it with the boomerang, you can just go all out with jump attacks with the Deku Sticks. Though I do believe in between damage phases like this, as you see, it just gets to spam attacks. I want to say the length of those depends on the amount of damage you do. As well, it might be distance based, so you just want to back up a bit. Barinade's not a very hard boss. Can be damaging, though, depending on your heart count and how reckless you're being, just due to the amount of damage it can throw at you, how much more quickly. Well, that was gory. We get a heart container from the mess that once was Barinade as usual, and with that, Jabu-Jabu's belly is complete. Also, hi, Ruto, there you are. You're late! What took you so long? You're useless! I was just lonely, that's all. Just a little. Oh. Most people's first tsundere. God help us. But with that, I'm going to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 12, I guess we're somehow going to get the spiritual stone of water from Ruto before going around Hyrule once again with our boomerang to see what we can now grab with it. See you guys then.